Ray, if it's only a memory meal, then it's actually a lot. It's really easy to see why it would be less important who takes it and who doesn't. If it's only a meal for the purpose of remembering, then it's not that hard to see why someone might not be too concerned over who's actually receiving it. Because if I remember, you don't. What's the big deal, right? But because we understand that it's truly Christ's body and blood present, now we have the question to ask, which is essentially, what is the implication of receiving this? And the clearest place to have that conversation is in the book of First Corinthians. Chapters 10 and 11 do it really clearly for us when we're told that if we do not discern the body appropriately or receive the Lord's Supper worthily, we receive it to our, as my confirmands will tell you, to our judgment, to our damnation, right? And now, what does that mean? Well, it certainly doesn't mean nothing, right? It doesn't mean I remember, you don't, no big deal. We, as Lutheran Christians, take very seriously the idea that one who receives the body and blood of Christ in an unworthy manner would receive it to their detriment, to their harm. And so it becomes essential to us that we not be the ones who facilitate that. And I think that there's a little bit, sometimes you'll hear a pretty dishonest um, perspective, which is to say, basically, who am I to judge, or why would we be the ones who need to make that decision? Why don't we let them work that out with God? But the problem with that very idea is, first of all, there's no compassion in it. We wouldn't give anybody something that we knew would be to their detriment. Um, you wouldn't give your child or somebody else any food that you knew would be poisonous to them. You wouldn't hand a weapon to somebody who couldn't wield it appropriately. You wouldn't give. I wouldn't let my 10-year-old drive my motorcycle. It would not be a good idea because I know they'd get hurt. And in the same way, if we know clearly from God's word that this would be a detriment to those who receive it without discerning the body, there's no possible way for us to do that with a good and clear conscience, even if that's really painful. I want to add one more thing, though, really quickly. I think that it must be true that, I mean, this is not fully true, but almost every Christian agrees there is some line that they would fence the table at. So, in other words, almost no Christians or Christian churches even would say they would give the Lord's Supper to somebody who's a Muslim, for example. Most Christians wouldn't do that. And so they're already drawing some line somewhere, is my point. And and then so the question becomes just essentially, well, where do we draw the line? How do we know how we do that? And I found that people are doing that in different places for different reasons. But if you want to do it with the word guiding you, then you recognize that the drawing the line at the table could relate very clearly to unrepentant sin, but also, as First Corinthians makes clear, to a division in the body that requires it. And that would come over a faith we don't share.
Yeah, something I really struggle with and something that I see from the LCMS is something um that's pretty hard for when I see this is when people look at closed communion and they do see the importance of it, but they refuse to push it or use it as a primary piece of doctrine that we need to uphold for just the sake of I don't want to offend anybody. There's someone that just doesn't believe in it in a certain way. I want them to be part of our church, or we don't want to lose members. We want to invite more people to come. So we're going to um, overlook everything and we're just going to bend some rules. And I think something I struggle with a lot with the LCMS right now is how I love the system that we have where people do have the freedom to structure divine service the way that they want. We don't have a dictator within our synod that is telling us we have to do every single thing by the book. But unfortunately, the way that this is structured, well, anytime you have a system like this, it's going to be flawed because we have sinful people everywhere that are always wanting to be corrupting things and making things an issues or disregarding doctrine, tradition, or Bible doctrine. And you'll have these people within our churches, and they'll just throw things like closed communion and use it as a secondary issue and not a primary issue, which I find really concerning. Because I can't find myself in a good conscience to see someone in an LCMS church and they might say, "Yeah, I don't think a Muslim should be able to take the Lord's Supper," but at the same time, welcome their Baptist friend across the street and let him take it. I
Yeah.
feel obligated to stand up and say this is not okay.